And blindness is dangerous, because when you can't see clearly, you fall into traps, you get deceived, and before you know it, you're entangled in relationships or environments that drain you, demoralize you, and sometimes even break you. So how do you develop awareness? How do you train yourself to recognize those who operate in bad faith? Well, the first thing you need to do is pay attention, real attention to how people act, not just what they say. This is crucial because words are easy, talk is cheap, and bad people, particularly the manipulative ones, are often extraordinarily good at using words to mask their true nature. They'll tell you exactly what you want to hear. They'll present themselves as kind, as generous, as wise, but if you pay attention, if you really watch what they do, you'll start to see the cracks in the facade. One of the most reliable warning signs of a bad person is inconsistency. Their words and actions don't align. They promise loyalty but betray trust when it benefits them. They preach virtue but live in deception. They claim to support you but their actions undermine you. And here's the trick. They don't want you to notice this discrepancy. In fact, they rely on you not noticing. They assume you won't be paying close enough attention to see the path. But if you cultivate awareness, if you train yourself to watch rather than just listen, you'll start catching these inconsistencies. And once you see them, you can no longer unsee them. Another key sign to watch for is how a person treats those who can do nothing for them. This is a major test of character, because anyone can be kind when it's beneficial. Anyone can pretend to be generous when they know they'll receive something in return. But if you want to see a person's true nature, watch how they treat those who are beneath them in status. How do they talk to the waitress at a restaurant? How do they behave toward the janitor in their office? How do they respond when there's no potential gain from their actions? A person who is cruel to the powerless is revealing something fundamental about their soul. That cruelty will not stay confined to those beneath them forever. It will spill over into every area of their life. And if you get too close, you'll become a target. Now let's talk about deception, because manipulation and deceit are the weapons of bad people. This is what they use to control others to get what they want without revealing their true intentions. And the frightening thing is that many of these people are highly skilled at deception. They've spent years, sometimes decades, refining their ability to twist reality in their favor. And if you're not careful, if you're not vigilant, you can fall for it. One of the most common manipulation tactics is gaslighting. Now, you've probably heard this term thrown around, but let's define it clearly. Gaslighting is when someone distorts your perception of reality in order to make you doubt your own judgment. It's psychological warfare, and it's incredibly effective, because if someone can make you question your own memory, your own perceptions, your own feelings, then they can control you. They can make you believe whatever suits them. They can paint themselves as the victim when they were the aggressor. They can convince you that you're overreacting when you're responding reasonably. And over time, this warps your ability to trust yourself. And when you can't trust yourself, you're lost. So how do you protect yourself from deception? How do you guard against manipulation? The first step is to trust your instincts. If something feels off in an interaction, if there's a discrepancy between what's being said and what's actually happening, pay attention to that feeling. Don't dismiss it. Don't rationalize it away. Your subconscious is incredibly good at picking up on inconsistencies, even if you can't articulate them immediately. The second step is to ask yourself, does this person make me feel confused? This is important, because when you're dealing with an honest, straightforward person, things are clear, communication is direct, you know where you stand. But when you're dealing with a manipulator, there's always this lingering fog of confusion. One moment they're warm and affectionate, the next they're cold and distant. One moment they praise you, the next they tear you down, and you start to wonder, am I the problem? Am I imagining things? No, you're not imagining things. That confusion is intentional. It's a tactic. And if you find yourself in a relationship, whether personal or professional, where you're constantly second-guessing your reality, that's a major red flag. The third step is to observe how a person reacts when they're confronted with the truth. This is a critical test, because good people Decent, honest people can acknowledge when they've made a mistake. They can admit when they're wrong. But a bad person, a manipulator, they will never admit fault. Instead, they'll deflect, they'll shift the blame, they'll turn the conversation around and suddenly make you the problem. You bring up a valid concern, and instead of addressing it, they explode in anger. They guilt trip you. They make you feel like you were wrong to even bring it up in the first place. That's not normal conflict resolution. That's emotional manipulation. So what do you do when you recognize these behaviors? The answer is simple but not easy. You distance yourself. You set boundaries. You don't engage in arguments with people who are committed to distorting reality, because you won't win. You can't reason with someone who has no respect for the truth. And here's the final, most important thing. Don't think you can change these people. This is a trap that many fall into. If I just love them enough, if I just explain things clearly, if I just give them another chance, maybe they'll change. No, people don't change unless they want to change. And bad people, the truly deceitful, manipulative, toxic ones, don't want to change because their tactics work for them. They get what they want. They thrive in the chaos they create. Your job is not to fix them. Your job is to protect yourself, to cultivate awareness, to build relationships with people who add to your life, not drain it. Because your future, your success, your happiness depends on the company you keep. And if you allow bad people into your inner circle, you will pay the price. So be vigilant, be discerning, and most importantly, never ignore what your gut is telling you. And one of the most damning characteristics of a bad person, one of the clearest warning signs that you're dealing with someone truly dangerous, is their refusal to take responsibility for anything. And I don't just mean the little things, I mean their entire approach to life. It's a fundamental failure to confront reality. It's a refusal to look in the mirror and say, maybe the problem is me. And instead, what they do, what they always do, is point the finger outward. And instead, what they do is point the finger outward. It's always someone else's fault, always. Now, you need to think very carefully about this, because if you don't develop the ability to recognize this trait early on, you're going to spend years, maybe even decades, entangled in the psychological games of people who will never admit they are wrong. And let me tell you, there is nothing more exhausting, more soul-draining than dealing with someone who refuses to take responsibility for their own actions. Because what they're doing, whether they realize it or not, is placing the burden of their failures onto you. And that's something I talked about earlier, about the nature of manipulation and deception. Because bad people, they don't just lie with words, they lie with narratives. They create these entire stories where they are always the victim, always the misunderstood genius, always the one who's being unfairly treated. And if you're not careful, if you don't develop the capacity to see through that kind of distortion, you'll get pulled into their version of reality. And that's dangerous. Now, why is it dangerous? Well, it's dangerous because responsibility, taking ownership of your actions, is the foundation of competence. It's the foundation of improvement. You can't fix something if you don't admit it's broken. You can't grow if you refuse to acknowledge your mistakes. And so people who avoid responsibility, they don't just lie to others, they lie to themselves. They construct this illusion of blamelessness, and they live inside it, trapped. And I'll tell you something else about these people. They love to surround themselves with enablers. They need enablers because deep down, they know that without someone to absorb the blame, without someone to carry their failures, their whole illusion would collapse. So they seek out people, often good, kind-hearted, conscientious people who are willing to shoulder responsibility for them. And that's a very interesting thing, because good people, people with strong moral character, often become targets for those who refuse to take responsibility for their own actions. And you might wonder, why does that happen? Why are bad people so drawn to good people? Well, it's simple. Bad people need good people to survive. If you're someone who has integrity, who believes in fairness, who tries to see the best in others, then you are exactly the kind of person that a manipulator or a blame shifter wants around, because you will make excuses for them. You will say, oh, well, maybe they had a tough childhood, or maybe they just need more time to grow. And meanwhile, they will continue to use you as a shield against reality. Now, let's take this a step further. What happens when someone refuses to take responsibility for their actions? What kind of person do they become over time? Well, they become resentful. And resentment is one of the most toxic psychological states that a person can inhabit. You see, if you go through life blaming everyone else for your problems, then eventually you're going to start believing that the world itself is unjust. You're going to start believing that other people are conspiring against you. And once you believe that, well, then you feel justified in doing all sorts of terrible things. That's where you get people who manipulate others, not just to avoid blame, but to punish those they perceive as responsible for their suffering. That's where you get people who sabotage relationships, destroy friendships, undermine their colleagues at work, all because they have convinced themselves that life has been unfair to them. And what's so tragic about this is that the more they refuse to take responsibility, the worse their situation becomes. Because look, life is hard enough, even when you're taking full responsibility for everything you do. Even when you're disciplined, when you're honest, when you're constantly trying to improve, life is still difficult. But if you reject responsibility, then life doesn't just become difficult, it becomes hell. Because every time you avoid blame, every time you refuse to learn from a mistake, every time you shift the burden onto someone else, you're actually losing control over your own destiny. You know, I see this a lot in people who have a victim mentality. They'll say things like, well, I can't succeed because the system is rigged, or I'm not happy because other people keep bringing me down. But what they don't realize is that every time they say that, they're reinforcing their own helplessness. They're teaching themselves that they have no control over their lives. And once you start believing that, once you convince yourself that you are not the primary agent in your own story, then you become a puppet. You become a pawn in other people's narratives. And I'll tell you something else. Bad people want you to believe that you have no control. They want you to think that everything is just a matter of fate or luck or oppression or whatever excuse they're using that day. Because the moment you take control of your own life, the moment you say, no, I am responsible for where I am and I can do something about it, well, that's the moment you become immune to their manipulation. That's the moment you stop playing their game. So what can you do? How do you protect yourself from these kinds of people? Well, the first step is simple. Pay attention to patterns. If someone in your life always seems to have a reason why nothing is ever their fault, that's a huge red flag. If every time something goes wrong, they immediately look for someone else to blame, then you need to be very, very careful. Because if you're not careful, you will become that person's scapegoat. And the second step, hold people accountable. Don't let them get away with rewriting history. If you see someone twisting the truth, if you see them avoiding responsibility, call it out, at least in your own mind. Because if you don't, you'll start to doubt your own perceptions. And that's exactly what these people want. They want you confused. They want you second-guessing yourself. Because the more uncertain you are, the easier you are to control. And finally, take full responsibility for your own life. Don't wait for someone else to give you permission to succeed. Don't let other people's excuses become your excuses. Because at the end of the day, the only thing worse than dealing with someone who refuses to take responsibility is becoming someone who refuses to take responsibility. And if you're not careful, if you let these kinds of people influence you for too long, that's exactly what can happen. So be vigilant, watch for the signs, and never, never let someone else's lack of accountability drag you down with them. The most malevolent traits a person can possess, and one that often hides in plain sight, is envy. It's a quiet, corrosive force. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a flashing sign saying, "Here I am, ruining everything good in your life." No, it festers in the background, disguised as a concerned friend or a helpful colleague or even a loving family member. But beneath the surface, it seeks to tear you down. And here's the thing, bad people, truly destructive individuals, are full of envy. They can't stand to see you succeed. They can't stand to see you grow because, in their mind, your success is a direct attack on their failures. And this, my friends, is where resentment comes into play. Because envy alone might just be a private, bitter emotion, but resentment, that's a weapon. That's when a person starts thinking, not only do I wish I had what you have, but I also think you don't deserve it. And if I can't have it, neither should you. Now let's tie this into what we've already discussed. I told you before about awareness, about being able to recognize the traits of bad people before they infiltrate your life and wreak havoc. This is one of those traits. It's insidious, and if you don't catch it early, it can poison your relationships, your confidence, and your ability to move forward. And we talked about manipulation and deception, didn't we? Well, here's how envy connects to that. People who are envious of your success will never admit it directly. No, that would require honesty. Instead, they'll disguise their resentment under the pretense of advice or concern. You've seen this before, haven't you? You tell someone about a goal you're excited about, maybe a big project you're working on, and instead of encouraging you, they immediately find a way to plant doubt in your mind. Oh, that's a really competitive field. Are you sure you're cut out for that? You know, most people fail when they try something like that. I just don't want to see you get disappointed. They say these things as if they care about you, as if they're trying to protect you. But that's not what they're doing. They're trying to keep you small. They see you climbing and they feel threatened by it, so they try to pull you back down to where they're comfortable. Now you might think, well, maybe they don't mean any harm. Maybe they're just being realistic. But ask yourself this, would they say the same things if it were someone else? Would they react the same way if it were their own success on the line? The truth is, people who struggle with envy often have a pattern. They only discourage those they secretly see as competition. And then we come to accountability. Bad people, as we discussed, never take responsibility for their own shortcomings. And what does that lead to? Envy. Because when you refuse to take ownership of your failures, when you refuse to acknowledge that your lack of success is due to your own actions or inactions, the only option left is to blame others. And who do they blame? The ones who are succeeding, the ones who are moving forward while they remain stuck. Instead of saying, maybe I need to work harder, maybe I need to make better choices, maybe I need to push myself more, they say, it's not fair, they had better opportunities, they had more luck, they don't deserve it. And that resentment starts to build. And when resentment builds, it doesn't just stay inside the person, it leaks out into their actions, into their words, into the way they interact with you. And here's where it gets really dangerous. Envy turns into sabotage. Sometimes it's subtle, passive-aggressive comments, dismissive attitudes, lack of support when you need it most. But sometimes it's direct. They might spread rumors, try to discredit you, or actively work against you behind your back. And you might never see it coming because these people often masquerade as your biggest supporters. Have you ever had someone in your life who, at first, seemed genuinely happy for you, but the moment you started surpassing them in some way, whether it was career success, a better relationship, personal growth, they suddenly changed? Maybe they became distant. Maybe they started downplaying your achievements. Maybe they started criticizing you in ways that didn't quite make sense. That's resentment at work. And the worst part, if you're not careful, if you don't recognize what's happening, their envy can start to infect you. If you let them plant those seeds of doubt in your mind, you might start questioning yourself. Maybe they're right. Maybe I don't deserve this. Maybe I should tone it down, not try so hard, not dream so big. But that's exactly what they want. They want you to shrink, because if you shrink, they don't have to face their own failures. If you stay small, they can stay comfortable. Well, let's talk about the flip side, because there's a lesson in this for you too. And this part might sting a little. You have to ask yourself, are you harboring envy toward others? Are you secretly resenting someone else's success? Because here's the thing, if you are, you need to address it immediately. Envy is a poison, and if you don't get rid of it, it will destroy you from the inside out. The proper response to seeing someone succeed is not to resent them, it's to learn from them. Instead of saying, why them and not me, ask, what did they do that I haven't done? Instead of tearing them down, observe their habits, their mindset, their work ethic. Use their success as inspiration, not as a source of bitterness. And if you find yourself surrounded by envious people who subtly or overtly resent your progress, you have to make a choice. You either let them drag you down or you rise above and distance yourself. There's no middle ground. Because if you spend enough time around people who resent success, you will start to absorb their mindset. And that is the fastest way to sabotage your own potential. Remember what I said earlier, bad people are not always obvious. They don't walk around with a warning label. But if you pay attention, if you develop your awareness, you will start to see the patterns. You will start to recognize who genuinely supports you and who secretly wants to see you fail. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you recognize envy for what it is, a sign of someone else's insecurity, not a reflection of your worth, you take away its power. You stop seeking validation from those who don't want to see you succeed. You stop explaining yourself to people who will never understand. And most importantly, you stop feeling guilty for outgrowing those who refuse to grow themselves. Because at the end of the day, your success isn't about them. It's about you. It's about what you're capable of. It's about how far you're willing to push yourself. And if someone else can't handle that, that's their problem, not yours. But don't let their resentment become your limitation, because there's too much at stake and you have too much potential to waste it trying to appease people who will never clap for you anyway. I don't mean someone who occasionally struggles to see things from another perspective. We all do that. No, I mean someone who fundamentally does not care about the impact of their actions on others. Someone who, when you're suffering, sees it as either irrelevant or worse, an opportunity. And that's something you need to recognize, because if you don't, you'll end up making excuses for them, thinking you can change them, or, even worse, thinking that their treatment of you is somehow deserved. Now, let's think about how this connects to what we've already discussed. In the beginning, I talked about awareness, being able to spot the warning signs. Well, this is one of the most important signs of all, because if you fail to recognize someone's lack of empathy, you open yourself up to an immense amount of psychological damage. People without empathy don't just happen to hurt others. They do it systematically, and they do it without remorse. And they do it in ways that at first might not even seem obvious. How does that work? Well, go back to the second keynote, manipulation and deception. A person who lacks empathy is often a master manipulator. Why? Because they don't feel the weight of moral responsibility that you do. They don't feel guilt. They don't feel shame, not in the way that decent people do. If they lie to you and you catch them, they don't feel bad about it. They feel annoyed that they got caught. And that's an entirely different psychological framework. That means they'll twist reality, not just to protect themselves, but to actively control you. Have you ever had someone make you doubt your own emotions, your own reactions? You tell them, hey, that really hurt me, and they look at you like you're crazy, like you're the problem for even bringing it up? That's a tactic. They do that to make sure you never stand up for yourself, because the moment you start questioning your own feelings, your own perception of reality, you become easier to control. And if they can control your emotions, they can control your actions. Now, let's tie this to the third point, lack of accountability. Why do they refuse to take responsibility for their actions? Well, think about it. If you lack empathy, then you don't actually care about the consequences of what you do to others. If you hurt someone and they tell you about it, and you feel no internal sense of guilt, why would you ever take responsibility? The answer is you wouldn't. Instead, you'd blame the other person. You'd shift the focus. You'd say, oh, you're just too sensitive, or that's not what I meant, or why are you always so dramatic? Do you see the pattern? This is a fundamentally dangerous way of thinking because accountability is what allows people to grow. If you can't admit you're wrong, then you can never improve. And if you never improve, you stagnate, or worse, you descend into deeper and deeper levels of malevolence. And that's where things get really bad. That's where envy and resentment start to take hold. That's where we move into the fourth keynote, envy and resentment. Why does a person who lacks empathy also tend to be deeply resentful? Because when you don't take responsibility for your own life, you end up blaming everyone else for your failures. And when you blame others, you begin to resent them. You resent their success, you resent their happiness, you resent their ability to form genuine connections because you can't. And that's an incredibly toxic cycle because it doesn't just destroy their own life, it poisons everyone around them. Have you ever had someone in your life who just could not be happy for you? Who, whenever you accomplished something great, found a way to make it seem smaller? Or worse, made you feel guilty for it? That's resentment. That's someone who sees your progress as an attack on them. And the worst part is, it's usually the people closest to you. Friends, family, colleagues, the people you expect to be your biggest supporters. But here's the harsh truth. Some people would rather see you fail than deal with the fact that they haven't made anything of themselves. And now we come back to empathy, because when someone lacks empathy, they don't just feel that resentment, they act on it. They will actively try to sabotage you. Sometimes it's subtle, little comments designed to make you second-guess yourself. Sometimes it's more overt, spreading rumors, taking credit for your work, or even trying to turn others against you. And the terrifying thing is, because they lack empathy, they don't even see a problem with what they're doing. In their mind, they're justified. They convince themselves that you deserve to be taken down a notch, that you owe them something, that it's your fault they feel inadequate. Now, you might be